Welcome to Mind Coast, everyone. Thanks for being here. Our discussion topic is one that's not so easy to grasp, so let's reflect for a moment. Intention 12. Gratitude for suffering. What are the challenges in your life, and in what ways do they make you feel weakness? Are you experiencing hardship in terms of ability, having yet to develop a noteworthy level of competence or achieve any substantial resourcefulness? What about hardship in terms of character? Are you able to uphold honesty and self-control throughout your shared and personal life? And what of suffering we receive from others? How much easier would our lives seem to be with the replacement or removal of those people? Have these inherited or acquired agonies brought with them changes to, or the closing off of your personality? Are you left questioning the reason for this burden being your own? And thus, why God would allow this to take place if He's a part of your life? Our hardships and vulnerabilities don't offer us any comfort by themselves, but in our learning to endure them faithfully, we're given the opportunity to know more and draw closer to our Lord, from which we can bring forth much goodness. So, where do we find gratitude amidst our suffering? Quite simply, following Jesus can be stressful, exhausting, and demanding for all of us. There is a tendency to both introduce and initially understand Christianity in an oversimplified and over-fantasized manner that's actually quite far from its totality. If a faith-filled life was as simple as just praying for our desires and awaiting their arrival, then everyone would be a follower of Christ. But walking with Jesus isn't an exemption from any kind of suffering, and that can be very hard to come to an understanding with because of its apparent contradiction to God's purely benevolent will and omnipotence. If you love me and can do anything, then why don't you remove this discomfort, Lord? Is a completely valid and comprehensible question at any stage in our faith journeys. And even in all of His divine omniscience, God still empathizes with our limited understanding and human responses to hardship. The truth is simply that in a world where God gives each person free will over themselves, there will inevitably be suffering throughout our coexistence. People face obstacles and tragedies all the time because of their own choices or those of people close to them. But just as present in reality are people who've done nothing to deserve the same or even worse misfortunes befalling them. Suffering exists for the faithful and the faithless, with and without a reason. A good way to bring more context to this topic comes from the book of Job in the Bible. I encourage everyone to do their own study of the text, but to summarize for our discussion, Job was an outstanding man who lived righteously and was blessed with family and prosperity. He was a blameless man, and yet God allowed him to be relentlessly tormented by the devil. Job lost all of his property and livestock in a raid. His children were killed in a natural disaster that collapsed a building upon them, and his body was stricken all over with painful sores, so much so that his friends could barely recognize him anymore. Through each new obstacle, Job never turned his mouth against God, even when the people around him would question his continued devotion. But at the pinnacle of his suffering, Job questions God with all of his built-up anguish and confusion about his undeserved torment and wishes that he'd never been born. God responds to Job by showing him the vastness of the universe, and despite its humanly incomprehensible magnitude, every single component is purposefully arranged and balanced by God. To which Job is quick to realize, not only is he completely unaware about so much that entails his own reality, but that he's in no position to question what transpires under God's authority with such a limited perspective by comparison. In the end, Job apologizes to God for questioning what he could never hope to understand. But God applauds Job for seeking out truth and understanding directly from him and continuing to faithfully struggle for clarity. And in that lies the cornerstone of gratitude for suffering. The reason why the faithful suffer, why bad things happen to good people, and so many of life's complexities exist, just can't be found through human reasoning or purposed through our limited individual perspectives. but in our struggle to understand these aspects of life in relation to who God has revealed himself as. We make our faith known in the honesty of our desire for truth, to which God draws closer to us. Our humanity is completely understood by God. So when we're searching for holistic truth about our existence, after coming to understand that our own logical reasoning isn't enough to make sense of how reality unfolds, we're able to grow in our understanding of God through the submission of our own logic, even if it's just a little bit. And what we must all come to understand is that God is not merely a source of relief, but one who in our suffering doesn't leave us alone. As touched upon in our previous intention, how to pray, we don't seek God's presence to favorably shape how our lives unfold, but rather we're called to trust that God has a plan, however life seems to be unfolding, and it's in that trust that we find the strength to be grateful for suffering. Thankfulness just for being tried and tested doesn't make any sense, but our journey is to grow in appreciation for the opportunity those events present to our faithful endurance. If we didn't believe that God is completely in charge of all creation and is also just as aware of our individual existences, then of course there'd be no reason to guard ourselves from bitterness and have hope amidst our turmoil. But our trust in God's awareness and orchestration is our reason to look beyond the discomfort we feel and towards what can be gained in each moment. In any kind of faithful suffering, whether it's a personal struggle to become a better person or dealing with troubles both self-inflicted and from others, our experience of that pain and questioning its reason helps foster wisdom and empathy. In our search to understand the circumstances that exist beyond our control, we're prompted to examine every aspect of ourselves in order to determine how they've influenced our lives to this point and where we're headed. It's a cause to pause, be still, and really consider if we're ready and willing to trust in God and actively face our challenges and weaknesses all the way through. Because if faith is what we're choosing, and with that choice must be the resolve to persist our best in holiness, then it's absolutely possible for us to be grateful for the opportunities to establish a wiser and more resolute self in facing the challenges presented to us. And it's not just that, but our knowledge of how much the challenges we face weigh on us and can pervade throughout our lives is what leads to an understanding of and compassion for others who are able to recognize that same suffering in. That cultivation of spiritual insight that allows for those realizations creates opportunities to truly touch people's lives for the better. And that strength, which we can only recognize its existence from weakness, is what calls all of us to be leaders for those who we cross paths with. So even if our life is filled with hurdles and those obstacles remain in our path into the distant future, try to take heart in the lessons to be learned, the strength to be achieved, the faith to be realized, and the self to be refined. What we endure for our Lord will surely be part of a greater triumph, even if we can't see it in the making. And just to mention, at the end of the book of Job, God restores everyone and everything that had been taken away from Job, not because of remorse for Job's suffering and outcry, or as a reward for his eventual realization of his own ignorance, but just as a free gift. In our own lives, although the things that we are positioned to endure may not always make sense, we find our resolve to persist in always searching for what is to be learned, cultivated, or revealed from our experience, because our faith is meant to be absolute. Life isn't easy, but part of its purpose is to show us that we need God and we need each other. So even if you're going through a rough patch, don't lose sight of your reason to hope for better. Keep reaching for the strength to see what exists beyond self-pity. Thanks for listening, everyone. Feel welcome to join our community, and I hope we meet again. Peace.